Welcome to The Growth Switch, the podcast where we dive into the strategies, struggles, and breakthroughs of bold business leaders. I'm your host, Jules Fox, growth strategist and lead content creator at Aries Media. I'm here to uncover how today's top brands are scaling, overcoming challenges, and unlocking sustainable success. Now, for those of you who are just tuning in, Aries Media helps grow successful brands with comprehensive hands-on support for sales, business development, and performance marketing. So go ahead and drop growth down in the comments. We're going to look at that, and we will show you how you can do that. Today, we are lucky enough Stephen Wasick. He's the founder of InfoSentience, where he's revolutionizing data analysis by using AI to generate insightful, human quality reports at a massive scale. He's helping companies turn overwhelming data into clear, actionable stories. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Jules, thanks for having me, man.
Hey, for sure, of course. Awesome to have you on the podcast. And I do have to say that we talk to a lot of people on this podcast about AI. Obviously, that's a hot industry buzzword, but it's pretty impressive because you've been doing AI for a long time, like much long before it was cool, long before ChatGPT. How did you possibly think that AI was going to be a big deal?
I won't take credit for it, man. I mean, I had an idea when I was finishing up law school. I was in a fantasy football league and I was like, man, I don't know what's going on in this league because I was just busy. And I was like, man, it'd be really cool if I could have coverage of my personal fantasy football league that was just like coverage of the NFL, right? Where you could just sort of log in and see like interesting stories and previews and recaps and all sorts of things, right? So it was just a very small idea like that. And I started working on it and it turned out to be really, really hard to actually get the language to be interesting and for the system to actually surface insightful things as opposed to just sort of rote basic things, like, oh, this team won, this team lost, right? Like the things that are actually interesting are like, this team beat this other team in the playoffs, but now they like totally got their revenge, right? Like those are the things that are actually like narratives that actually are compelling. And so to get those to go consistently, it was a real big technical challenge. By the time I'd finished that, I realized that I had something that could have applications in a lot of different spaces besides just fantasy sports or even just sports in general. So I just kind of was sort of just like pulling on a string on a sweater more, like rather than having any sort of grand plan. And we've just been kind of doing that and making consistent improvements with our technology since then.
Yeah. I mean, well, they say a lot of times as a founder, if you can solve a problem for yourself, you can solve a problem for other people as well. But it's so interesting that you went from, an interesting, like, I wish I knew more about my fantasy football team to like, I bet a lot of people wish the same thing. So how did you take it from, I have an idea, this is kind of a small concept, I'm just kind of figuring this out for myself, it's an interesting hobby project. How did you take that to a full-fledged business?
Well, I basically had, I had a demo, like a tech demo, and I just did a small friends and family round. And I got that basically funded right as I was exiting law school. And so I just decided to do this for like a year. I had an employee that joined me who, was my first employee, and he was great and he did a great job. And we just kind of really lucked into getting CBS Sports as a client, which is obviously a great client to have. There's not that many large fantasy sites. There's really like 3. So we got one of the 3, and they were, they sort of paid the bills as far as giving us the time and space to improve the technology and giving us a little bit of runway so that we could try to sell the technology to some other folks. And, one of the companies that we've sold to since then that was a big sort of anchor client for us that we still work with is the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, which is the largest commodities trading firm in the world. And we do automated commodity coverage for them. And so we just got pretty lucky in order that we had some good clients right from the get-go, and that we've been able to maintain relationships with all those anchor clients for like 12, 13 years. I mean, it's a long time. So we must be doing something right at least. But yeah, so it's just sort of a bit of good luck and then being able to keep those anchor clients happy.
Yeah. I mean, 12, 13 years, most businesses fail. In the first 2 to 5 years, you got 85% of business failing. And then you have an AI company, which a lot of people are like, yeah, we do AI. I was working with some people not that long ago, and they had an AI powered like toothbrush thing. And I was like, really? Like, what does it do? And they're like, yeah, because it's AI. I'm like, yeah, but like, what does it like sense here? So.
Haven't you ever noticed that ChatGPT's breath never smells badly? Like it never smells bad. Why do you think that is?
It's the AI, Yeah. So how did you grow your company? So you started with this thing. Obviously, you think that you lucked out, by getting like one of the 3 major players, but probably you have a fantastic product. So how did you grow from there? How was it? What was your expansion plan?
I mean, just being honest, we haven't been able to grow as fast as we wanted to because within about a year and a half, we had CBS as a client, and I think that our technology was actually better than some of the other competitors in the space. There weren't that many back then. But I had this idea for a much more sophisticated system that was what I hoped would be a pretty big breakthrough in general AI. And I thought it would take me like 6 months because the first program took me about 9 months and I was still in law school at the time. So I thought, all right, like this will be much better. And it ended up taking me 8 years. And that entire time I thought it was like almost done. So it wasn't even just that it was 8 years. It was that it was like 8 years of being like, well, like a couple months from now, like this will be finished and then we can start our big biz dev push. So it's sort of a miracle, honestly, that we even stayed alive during that time. But we did finally finish it, and we do have a technology that I think is really powerful. And it's just to be clear for people who aren't familiar with our technology, which I'm guessing is almost everybody, is that we're not using LLMs, right? So that's the standard when people talk about generative AI. They're talking about a probabilistic system. Our system is actually deterministic, so it doesn't hallucinate, and it can work with numbers really well, like even huge amounts, like many gigabytes of numbers, right? Because it's working sort of like a calculator where it's not making mistakes. And so, around 2021, we finally finished like the technology I was working on. And since then we've been growing, but I think, and we've had some good growth even just this year. But it's definitely been a bit of a process. It's slow, and I think that a lot of people within the generative AI space are struggling with a lot of the same hurdles that we went through as a company in growing. And that is that there's a lot of general need for reporting and analysis and things like that. But when you actually get down to what people will really use, and then therefore what people will actually pay for, it gets pretty tricky. And you need to have, when you're trying to actually like grow, like with like a sales funnel or things like that, it'd be great to be able to just know from the outside, okay, this company for sure has this problem where it's like a reporting problem at scale. That would be valuable, but it's really hard to know that from the outside. And so you really kind of, most of our sales calls are very exploratory, right? Where we're just trying to figure out sort of what is it that they have, what is it that they want to use. And that makes it a little bit harder to do sort of traditional biz dev, where you're just sort of saying like, hey, I know you have XYZ problem and here's the solution.
Right. I mean, it may be the case where they simply don't even know what their problem is. Like they have an awareness of what their problem might be, but they don't really know what that problem actually is.
Exactly. And sometimes, and I mean, this has happened to us, unfortunately, where people will say, we've had clients where they've come to us and been like, hey, we have this problem. Like, it'd be so awesome if we had these reports. And then we build those reports. And then when they actually get them out to the users, they're like, we don't need this report. You know what I mean? Like, and it's not like it's a bad report. And they're not saying like, oh, you didn't do the 5 things that we asked you to do. It's like we always try to go above and beyond. So it's like, well, we did the 5 things plus like 3 more that we thought would be cool or whatever. And then it's like, we don't really use this that much. Like the actual sales team, like it's a lot of, I mean, this happens all over with corporations where you have a data team and you have a sales team or an executive team. And a lot of times they're not always on the same page as far as people cooking up things in the
Absolutely.
analytics department. And it's like, cool, this looks neat and nobody uses it. Right?
Well, there's a huge disconnect between the silos. You end up with these companies that become overly siloed. And if the teams aren't able to, work with each other, if they're not able to mesh, it doesn't matter what kind of amazing solution you come up with. If they're not actually using it, then there's no actual value, unfortunately.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge, but we've been able to navigate it, thankfully.
Yeah. So okay, that's we're good on the problems. Like there's plenty of problems out there. What's an example of some of the solutions that you are allowed to talk about, the stuff that you've been able to help people with?
Sure. I mean, like within sports, one of the big things that we've done recently is work with Max Preps, which is the largest high school sports site in the country. So if you have high school level athletes as like kids or grandkids, you're probably familiar with them. And so basically they didn't have coverage of most of their games. Like 99% of the games did not have any coverage, even though they had the stats. But now we actually write, recaps, previews. We highlight individual player performances if they've reached sort of like a career high, or hey, this is their first touchdown, or this is their first time getting 10 rebounds in a game. We'll write up an entire article just about that player and putting their game into context and talking about who they're going to be playing next week and whether that's a fellow star player, all sorts of things, right? Like the history of that player versus the team that they're playing next game. Like it gets into a lot of detail, just like a good human reporter would. So that's one of the things that we do. That's just an example of like, hey, we've got a bunch of data. We don't have content, right? That's sort of like our content generation side of things. Mm-hmm. Within the CME group, it's like we're reporting on commodity markets, right? Where these are complicated markets that are moving all the time. And so in order to sort of keep on top of it, it's very difficult, right? You kind of have to be looking at it all day, right? And so for people who are just maybe not corn market traders, but they just want to, maybe they're an oil trader, but they're like, what's going on with the corn market? They want a quick snapshot, right, of what's happening sort of right now. Our system can provide that. And we're going to be launching very soon these literally like up to the minute reports, for CME where you could say like, here's what's going on right now, in the market. And again, that's a type of use case where time is a factor. Again, it's like scale, time, all these things that human beings tend to struggle with are really good for computers. And so if you have a situation where you have a bunch of numbers, you need a lot of reports, or you need those reports updated, with a ton of frequency, any situation like that is going to be a really good possible use case for our technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Being able to zoom in and get granular on pretty much anything. Now, how do you personally walk me through that? Because, when you said we have written this types of content for these hundreds of thousands of things, I don't know, how many articles do you think you've put out, and who writes those articles?
We actually just reached a milestone last month of we're over 250 million.
250 million. Yeah. I mean, that's insane. And how many writers do you have on your team?
Well, right now it's like me and two other people. So
Right. So it's really just AI that's cranking out these articles, right?
Oh yeah, it's definitely not us.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all manually built. I mean, again, because it's not LLMs, right? So like we have to handcraft these sort of. I mean, it's like handcrafted, but it's like we're handcrafting the components and we're handcrafting the intelligence so that the components know how they interact with each other. Because we don't want to just do templates, right? Like templates don't work. Again, that's kind of going back to what I was talking about. With getting beyond just the basics. If you have a template where you're just reporting on the things that happen every time, like a team won and a team lost, and here's their record, and here's who they're playing next week. By default, the things that happen every time are the least interesting things, right? So you have to have a system that's flexible so that it can surface the most interesting things. But every time you do that, now you have this basket of, maybe 1,000 different possibilities at each step in the article. And they all interact with each other and step on each other and can be repetitive or contradictory or what, you get all these really, really tricky things. So we handcraft the components, but we also handcraft the intelligence so that they understand how the components interact with each other. So that at the end of the day, you have something that's both flexible in the sense that it's like coming up with the most interesting information, but also is not going to hallucinate or not do anything else, right? So it's like that's the actual task that we do, where we build the intelligence, and then the system uses that intelligence to create, literally millions of articles in and out.
Yeah. Which is a brilliant concept and execution. If you could right now, if you could sit down and talk with somebody other than me, somebody who's your absolute ideal prospect, who would that be, and why is that? So in other words, who would this solution work perfectly?
That's a great question. I mean, we're really trying to make a push right now with sports because there's just so much going on in that space, especially with gambling being legalized. There's a lot more money going into the space. It's become really competitive, and that's where we have already a lot of different products. There are a lot of people that we're working with. So it might be sort of somebody at one of the top sports companies, like a content person. The other interesting thing it's good and bad, like with what we do, is that it's also even sort of unclear who we're talking to at the company as far as like who's the person we want to talk to, because we could be talking to the editor, right? Like somebody who's in charge of content, or we could be talking to somebody who's in charge of marketing, right? Or we could be talking to, just like individual journalists, or like who have like a specific thing that they're working on. We could be talking to, like the finance side team, where maybe it's like we're doing internal reporting that matter, right? Like dealing with like the metrics, right? Like the data team. So there's a lot of different people who we could talk to, which is, it's good and bad, right? Because you don't know exactly who to target. So I think that's another tricky thing that we've dealt with in the past is that it's unclear who to talk to first. And unfortunately, we ultimately sort of need to talk to all of them, right? Like we need to have approval from the editorial team. We need to have approval from like the legal team, which is now a bigger thing, especially with a lot of the situations that have happened with LLMs. The data team, like the technical team, to sort of integrate, even though, just to be clear, like we try to make things very, very easy to integrate. And we really pride ourselves on that. It's basically just like, give us your data, tell us what box you want us to drop it in, and like literally you're done. But you still need to have that conversation, right? So to just make sure that they're on board with the fact that we're not causing them a bunch of work. So I don't know. I guess I'd be a better business person if I knew who that person was. So I can only sort of speak in generalities, I guess, where it's just like, I'd love to talk to a decision maker at a big sports team, or big sports company.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because I feel like sports, we're changing a lot of the terminology in the words, like, sports could be all kinds of things. They have a lot of like online gaming as a sport now, and big competitions and a lot of big money in that type of thing. So I wonder if that's the next big thing, rather than high school football, is like, high school kids playing video games who are actually getting now media attention and getting articles written about them because they're doing great playing a video game.
No, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something we've explored. There's some trickiness to that, but but yeah, there's just so much growth, and especially just in data in general. Like in the past, like people didn't keep detailed statistical data of like little league games, but they do now. So you can look at
Yeah.
oh, this is their first time they've gone 3 for 3 since back in Pee Wee ball and when they were 8 years old or so, whatever. Like they have that stuff, so you can
Oh,
make
yeah.
better content, from it.
I mean, I hope that somebody didn't record my daughter's last soccer season. They were 0 for 20. They lost 20 straight games, which came on the heels of the season before where they won 20 straight games and went undefeated. So I think it was a big shocker. She was age gapped. She was on the winning team, and then they were like, well, let's keep her and give her all 2 years younger kids on her team. And it was a little painful to watch. But she personally did great. So I'm still proud of her. But I hope they didn't actually record the data. She's like applying for colleges, and they're like, yeah,
Right,
we
they're
saw
like,
that you did a whole season that was 0 for 20.
24. We don't allow losers in this college. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So what is your vision? So all right, 8 years to create this brand new model. Super exciting. You've got a bunch of prospects on the horizon, probably a few things that you can't quite talk about because there's some stuff in the pipeline. But how do you envision yourself in 5-10 years? Where do you envision this company, the trajectory of your company headed?
I mean, it can go in a few different directions. I mean, I think we'll just have to see. Like we're open to a lot of different arrangements. I mean, I do think that it's probably makes sense for us to team up with some sort of more strategic partner. Whether that's through some sort of investment or potentially a sale. But I just think that the space is moving so fast, and I think we do really have a pretty critical advantage right now, because I think that having this system it is generative AI, but it has some real strengths that just happen to sort of align up with LLM's weaknesses, which is that we can work at much lower level memory levels, right? Which is actually important for if you need to work sort of on device or sort of be air gapped and not be communicating with the internet through like a ChatGPT system or something. And it also really works well with deep analysis. So if you have a lot of numbers that you need to pour through and distill down to what's interesting, like the system works
Mm-hmm.
really well, and it doesn't hallucinate, right? Because it's not probabilistic. So there are situations where people really do not want, even 99.9% is just useless, right? Like, so you have to have something that's going to be 100% accurate. And
Yeah.
so we have these advantages, and I think that they'll remain advantages for a long time, but not forever, right? So I do think it makes sense for us to sort of team up with people who are trying to push the boundaries for the space, for sure, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And sort of
Mm-hmm.
be able
Mm-hmm.
to integrate what we've done into sort of broader contexts, whether that's sort of data analysis that they're doing or things that they're doing with LLMs, with probabilistic models. I just think that that's my only nervousness in this space, is just like I feel like we have a real advantage. I think that it's going to hold for a while, but probably not forever, and we're pretty small, so I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
pretend like we're going to outcompete. I mean, this is the thing that people care about the most, right? Like the most money, the smartest people. So I think that it'd be good to make use of our advantage by teaming up, probably at some point relatively soon, I think.
Sure. So I think that there are a lot of people who know a little bit about AI or think they know a lot about AI and all of the stuff that you do. What do you wish people knew? So if you would walk into a somewhat of an even playing field and have this conversation, what's one thing that you wish people knew more about or knew anything about for them to know how AI could benefit their company?
Wow, that's a tough one. My immediate thought is just to be very selfish and be like, I wish people knew more about our technology, because, like I said, I do think that it has specific advantages, right? That LLMs don't have. I mean, one of the things that we've found with clients recently is that they're very keen on us not having LLMs. Like they're like, you can't even use it as part of your system. Like that, like we have to sign legal documents, basically saying like, in order to get this thing approved, you have to tell us that you are not using machine learning or probabilistic functions or anything, right, in order to get this done. And I think that for a lot of people, when they think about AI, they're probably just thinking about LLMs as sort of the only solution, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I from a selfish standpoint, I would love if they knew that there was a deterministic solution that could
Mm-hmm.
maybe do what they want to do. Just in general, I would say that going back to this idea of some of the difficulties we've had with BizDev, it's so much is in the implementation and just the particular aspects of everybody's business. And I think this is another sort of weakness in a lot of LLMs that are out there right now, is that they they're trained on general information. They're not necessarily trained on your company's data or the specifics of, what needs to be done in your industry. And so I think that a lot of the work that needs to be done in order to really actually make use of AI, to bring it down to a more sort of particular level, as far as like literally, hey, this is the person in our company, and these are their tasks, and these are their workflows, and these are the types of data and situations and sort of balancing acts that they need to do with data. We really need to be able to actually teach the AI that information in order to actually make it work, right? For sort of these non-generalized activities, right? If you just have it needed to write a general email or just asking a question about how things work, right? In general, right? It's really, really good at that. But the next big steps, I think, over the next few years is really trying to make it work in specific use cases. And I definitely think that our software can be helpful with that too, because it can have this like very structured, manually built intelligence layer that can help the LLM interface.
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds like one of the interesting challenges that you're facing is that many companies sort of productize a thing. We can deliver to you those emails. We can deliver to you a website. We can deliver to you a pitch deck, which is a product. But what you're delivering is a customized solution, which is not as much productized, but is much more helpful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. Like it's not, it's good for our clients, not as good for us, right? Because we really do have to do quite a bit of work typically to dive into that information about what is it that goes beyond just the general use cases for particular data analysis or anything else, to understand like what are the actual pieces of information that you or your customers or whoever really would care about. And that definitely takes a bit of work.
Yeah. Super cool. Steve, thank you so much for jumping on this podcast. I really appreciate your time and energy. Just an absolutely exciting and innovative product. I mean, again, even 12 years later, saying that you have an innovative product that's still ahead of the competition is just an astounding feat. So thank you for your insight. Really appreciate it.
Jules, appreciate it, man.
Hey, for sure. Yeah. Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.
Yeah. Okay.